on Facebook. All right. Welcome, everybody. My name is Olivia Masters, and I'm the wildlife viewing technician at the Department of Environment. And tonight we're going to do another Facebook Live. We've done 2 of these already this year. In the summer, we did a Mushrooms 101, and then last month we did a Winter Adaptations, which was also super great. And tonight we're going to be doing, one second, here we go. We are going to be doing a camera trapping presentation. So tonight we're going to have Megan Hornseth talk to us all about that. And she has a PhD in wildlife ecology. And she has been doing lots of studies on other animals, wolverines, lynx, let's see what else we have, wolves, all sorts of things. And she's going to talk to us a little bit about the Cumulative Effects program at the Department of Environment. She joined us at the department about 2 years ago, and I'm really excited to learn a little bit more about this. We've all seen the super cool camera traps out there and seen the images come off them, but why do we have them? What are they? What's happening? We're going to learn tonight. If you have any questions at all throughout the presentation, please feel free just to put them in the comments section under the live, and we will get to them at the end of the presentation. And I'm going to pass it over to Megan. Here you go.
Great. Thanks, Olivia. Let me just start my share here. How's that? Good. Awesome. All right. So not only am I going to talk about camera trapping tonight, but I'm going to talk about how we use it for monitoring wildlife and specifically for monitoring around cumulative effects. So as Olivia mentioned, I have been at the department for just a couple of years, and actually the Cumulative Effects program here is only a couple of years old. So I'm going to give you a little bit of an overview. And just before we get to that, I do want to acknowledge that I'm presenting to you today from the traditional territories of the Kwalin First Nation and the Taan-Kwatchin Council. All right, so what are cumulative effects? And this comes up a lot, and they can be quite complicated. So, but really what we're looking at is changes in the environment due to interactions among human activities and natural processes. So, and over time. So they accrue over time, and how they impact different values. So we have all sorts of different things going out on the land. We have mining, we have roads for mineral exploration, and then we have forestry and agriculture, and all these things kind of start to add up. As well, we have different natural processes, say from forest fire or from spruce beetle, something along those lines. And all of these different activities change the landscape over time, and that can have different consequences on different values. So just to kind of give a little bit of an overview of what that might look like. This is just a photo from the Beaver River area, what I'll be talking about a little bit later, and just to kind of give a visual of what this might look like. So we have, let's say, these 2 pretend forest fires, and we'll say that the older forest fire, the orange one, is it's older. It has a different impact on the environment than, say, the red forest fire that maybe just happened last year or a couple of years ago. And looking at how these areas recover over time, that's going to have a different impact on one species versus another. So we have that side of things. We also, let's say, have some mineral exploration going on this landscape. Often that involves developing cut lines and looking at how that impacts the landscape. And then we might say, one of these mineral exploration sites leads to the development of a mine. It turns out to be a really rich area, rich in resources. And so then there's, interest to put this mine site in. And so what's that going to require? Well, that's a little bit different. When we put in a mine site, that's obviously going to have a bigger impact on the landscape. It's going to need a road. That's going to have a different impact on the landscape. And maybe with that road, the other site for mineral exploration also wants a road. So now we have all these things going on in the landscape. And really what we're trying to do is understand how that affects different values. Caribou are often seen as the poster child for cumulative effects. We know from a lot of work that's been done in Alberta that they're particularly sensitive to disturbance. But we're not just interested in caribou, we're interested in all sorts of different species, thinking about moose and grizzly bears and black bears and wolves and wolverines and all these things on the landscape. So how is that going to affect different things? So as I said, really what we're trying to do with cumulative effects is manage our impact on the land. We recognize that all these things that are going on are have an important economic component, but we also have to look at the consequences of what those developments might be for different species. And I am going to stay focused on the ecological component of cumulative effects. There is the other side of the socioeconomic components, but I'm a biologist, and so that's my forte is really on the ecological side of things. So really one of what we can learn from this is that a little bit of planning goes a long way. Where should we put that road? Is there somewhere where it would have less impact on the land? Could we maybe, instead of putting two roads out there, or a road and a hydro line, can we twin them and put them side by side? And that's going to have less impact on the land. And how do we monitor that impact is the other side of it. So at the Department of Environment, there's lots of wildlife monitoring that goes on. And a lot of it is very species focused. So for example, there's always a lot of work going on with caribou. So on the right there, we have a collared caribou, and those are really helpful for understanding how caribou move on the landscape, where they go different times of the year, and how they could be affected by different development and whatnot. And they also inform the surveys, which is a photo on the left. So this is a caribou survey where they're actually trying to count males versus females and cows versus calves. But that, only gives us one piece of the puzzle. So aerial surveys, we do them for moose and caribou, but it just tells us what's going on in one small part of the year. And GPS collars gives us another piece of the photo of the picture. They tell us about a few individuals and what they're doing at all different times of the year. But as I said, I'm really interested in looking at a lot of different species. So I decided to use camera traps. So there's a camera on the left there hidden under that tree. And these are the same as trail cameras that you might have in your backyard or out on the trap line. And what we're trying to do is really maximize our detection. So our ability to get those different observations, get photos of as many different things as possible. And so we put them on game trails. So you can see an old game trail through the lichen on the photo on the left. And these are exactly what we're looking for, to be able to put cameras out. These are like natural movement corridors, and they help us sort of pinpoint where we can put these cameras. So just before I dive in a little bit more on this, all this research so far is part of a collaborative project on cumulative effects using remote cameras. That's collaborative with the First Nation of Nashonayakdun, as well as the Wildlife Conservation Society. And it's funded by a number of different things, including obviously Yukon government, WCS, and Environment and Climate Change Canada. So what I wanted to do was be able to compare two different landscapes. The one on the left, this photo is taken just around Keno, where there's there's quartz mining, there's placer mining, there's you can actually see some old cut lines right at the foreground of the photo, and then you can see some roads in the background, and there's even a little bit of agriculture in there. And so this is kind of one piece of the puzzle. This is where this is a working landscape. And then on the right, we have, this is the Beaver River, just north of Mayo. And there's a little bit of mineral exploration going on here, but right now there aren't any roads in that area. And the other thing that we wanted to look at was fire. So there's a lot of fire in this area, and we wanted to be able to capture fires of different ages to understand how that would be affecting different species as well. So how did we put them out? Well, based on the landscape, we had to do it two different ways. In the photo on the left, we, despite the fact that this is July, had to shovel a little bit of snow to clear off an old resource road. And we used trucks and side-by-sides to try and get anywhere there was essentially a road or used to be a road in and around the Mayo and Keno areas. And I'll show you a map in a little bit as to where those cameras are. And then in the Beaver River, we used a helicopter. And here we're also we're limited by landing sites. So we need to find a wetland or a riverbank to be able to land on. But it made it a little bit easier to actually look for game trails because you're looking right down on them. When we deploy cameras by road, it takes a little bit more patience. We're driving really slowly, looking for game trails that might intersect the road, or we go to areas where we know that there's a higher likelihood of game trails, like wetlands or rivers, something that really draws animals in. And then we set up the cameras by actually using a security box that goes onto the tree. And this protects the camera from being destroyed by a bear. And bears and moose often come up and check out the camera, and it's an added layer of protection. It also means when we check the cameras from year to year that we can take them out of the box and where you don't change the setup at all. So that's really useful as well. We do take quite a bit of time to set up a site. It usually takes anywhere from 45 minutes to an hour because we want to clear all the vegetation around the site so it doesn't accidentally trigger the camera. We want to make sure we've got that camera pointed in the exact right direction. Sometimes you're just moving a screw by like a quarter of a turn. And then we test the cameras. And the last thing we do, this kind of gooey looking photo on the right, is actually use scent lure, and that kind of draws animals in from a little bit further away. So our goal is to be able to get animals in front of the camera. And sometimes animals might be really close by. They might only be like 100 or 200 meters away, but we're not going to get them unless they are right in front of the camera. So we use scent lure to get them a little bit closer. We usually try and put it opposite the camera, ideally in a tree, and it works really well, as you'll see in some photos coming up. So, so this is just kind of a little preview as to where the cameras are. You can see the Mayo Lake is the forked lake in through here. Mayo is to the south. Keno is just kind of in the middle here. And then you get into the Beaver River. And just if you need a little bit more context, we've got Whitehorse in the bottom corner here, and we're up around Mayo. That dot is Mayo. And so just going back, the orange outline is the Mayo Moose Management Unit. And that's our more disturbed landscape. And then we have the Beaver River watershed. So those are the two landscapes that we're comparing, but you'll actually see that they're not two separate landscapes. They're one continuous landscape. And so we may be able to answer some different questions because of that. So what can we learn from camera traps? Well, as I said, one of the reasons why I really wanted to use them is because we can capture a whole range of species, everything from a squirrel to a moose or a grizzly bear. Our cameras are set right now, we're targeting more the larger mammal species, but we can certainly get some information from other species as well. They're really cameras that I really like them because they're one of the least invasive methods that we can monitor wildlife, which means that sometimes we get some different things than you would get in other situations. And I'll show you that in just a minute. We can capture animals day or night and all through the year, although we have had some problems with cameras at -40, but they're getting better. The technology is getting better, and that's helping us out. So it's one fixed location, and we can monitor it for a couple of years and see what's going on there, see how from one year to the next, how the amount of snow might change things. Or if it's a really good berry year, that's going to affect the how many bears we're going to see. And so that's another thing, a really great thing about cameras is that we can use them to try and estimate abundance. So we can see here that there's a cow and actually 2 calves that are in this one site. And this is a time of year where we actually don't monitor moose very much because we do our aerial surveys in the early winter. And so it's great that we can get this time of year and see that these calves. I don't know that we actually had too many photos of twins, so that was pretty exciting. And this sort of information helps us to estimate abundance on the landscape. So not only can we say there's just a moose there, we can say actually there was a cow and 2 calves there. And how can that help us understand cumulative effects? Because we might see something different if there's more disturbance on the landscape, or if there is more recent fire, we might see a lot of moose around. But if there's older fires, we may not see that. And the same for bears. So if you look really hard, you can actually see 3 bears in this photo. And we can get other information there. We can see that there's 2 cubs. And we can see that those cubs are pretty small at the beginning of June. So we also get the information, the time of year that these were collected, the temperature. And that can help us as well. So if you haven't found the 3rd bear yet, it's climbing the tree there. It's pretty cute. And the other thing that we can get from this is identifying different individuals. So, instead of just saying bear, no bear, we can say, hey, there was a black bear and there was a brown bear and there were these cubs at different ages. And so we take that coat color information and we use that to help inform, how many bears might be on the landscape. And we can do the same thing with caribou or moose with antlers, where we actually count the number of times, and that helps us ID different individuals. So, if you just kind of focus on what this caribou's antlers look like, you can see that this next caribou is a little bit different. The first caribou, there's just 1 point right at the end, and the second caribou, it's forks at the end of their antlers. And then if you go into this 3rd caribou, you see that the antlers are actually quite a bit smaller. And so we're able to count the number of caribou that came through this site, which provides us a little bit of different information. And we can see how that might change from one year to the next. So I do want to focus on this one site that had caribou for a minute. So I've made some GIFs of some different sites, so you can sort of see how they go. And so this one in particular was a really interesting migration path that we found for caribou. Let's see if this works. So if you look in the top left, you'll see the different dates. And so all of this happens over about a 3-week period. And I don't remember exactly how many caribou we spotted at this site, but it was around 13 or 14. So I also think it's really neat because it's when all the leaves change and whatnot too. So this was a really great site. And they're not all this good, but we'll take them when we get them. And then another thing that we can get at with this type of data is looking at species interactions. Or looking at predator-prey interactions. And so if we go through to this next site, you can actually see that this is a moose, and 50 seconds later, there's a grizzly bear coming through. So we captured this a couple times in different areas, and specifically around the Beaver River, but it's really interesting behavior that we were able to see that we wouldn't get any other way. And, there's a particular interest for species at risk and using cameras to look at that. So one of my goals for this summer was to see if we could get what I called the trifecta. So the species at risk here are northern mountain caribou, wolverine, and grizzly bears. There was only one camera that we got the trifecta at, but we got it on one. And so this, starting off, there was a wolverine at the beginning there, and then a moose, this lovely grizzly bear. We also have a lynx going through. The bear adjusted the camera for us. And then the caribou. So that was pretty exciting. This was one of our best sites, possibly our best site. And it just happened to be a really great game trail. You can see the Rackla River in the background there. And and not only did we get the trifecta at the site, but we got the trifecta in 10 days, which was pretty incredible. You'll see, the bears are up in early May here, and they're pretty good sized bears, I'd say, for early May. So it's pretty interesting information that we can get out of this. So how do we use that sort of information to come back to this question around cumulative effects? So essentially, if you can think about there being different cameras on the landscape here, and we're trying to understand how different species do that. Well, how does that actually happen? And we do that through building some habitat models, trying to understand how animals are using the landscape, and then how that might change when there's disturbance there. And so that's why we have a disturbed site and an undisturbed site, so that we can use those two sites to look at the contrast of how animals are using the landscape in one versus the other. If we develop a model on where there's not very much disturbance, how does that change when we apply it to the other landscape? And then the other thing we can look at is relative abundance estimates. So how many animals are there, and how does that link to the amount of disturbance that's on the landscape as well? And we can build these disturbance relationships. And I'll show you a very simplistic example of that. But this allows us to develop that better understanding of how cumulative effects impact different species. So the big question here is trying to understand how much is too much. If we have, on the y-axis here going up and down, we have population size or population growth rates. These are different things that we might measure. We might also look at relative abundance. And then on the x-axis, going across the bottom here horizontally, we could be looking at habitat loss or the road density. And this all shows negative relationships, but not all relationships are negative when it comes to cumulative effects. The ones that we're usually more concerned about are the negative ones, in particular, again, going back to caribou. But really, we want to be able to understand what this relationship looks like before we get there, before we go past some sort of threshold that would make it a lot harder to recover. So these cameras out on the landscape, and by looking at two different areas, they'll help us, give us the tools to make better decisions and think about how that might impact something like land use planning or environmental assessments for different projects, and just how we can make the best decisions. So this is an example coming out of Alberta. I've mentioned a couple times, we all know there's a lot going on in Alberta. And this is just, maybe something that we'll get to one day. But essentially, I just want to show here, coming back to the thought that not all cumulative effects are negative. So some of these species benefit from having early age forests, say from forestry. If you look for the snowshoe hare or the moose or deer, they prefer those areas that have either been recently cut or recently burned. And then we look at linear features on the landscape, and that can have a different impact as well. So, pretty much just like all of us, we want to take the path of least resistance through the forest. And, often we'll take the little old trail versus just bushwhacking because it's easier. Well, animals do the same thing. And so really, what we see from some of these different studies are that animals, especially like wolves, when there's roads or other linear features like seismic lines or trails around, they move faster and farther than they would if there weren't those roads there. Just as you can think about how we move faster and further when there's roads versus when you're going through the bush. But what happens, and all species, I think, well, maybe not all, but most species do, they select those areas. And so the other thing that you get with linear features is that it's way easier to see down them. If you have a straight line through the forest, it's way easier to see that there might be a caribou or a moose up there. And so wolves continue to use those areas to understand to better search for prey. But what it means is that when it comes to the prey animals, your caribou or moose, they're more susceptible to predation on those areas. And caribou in particular are sensitive to wolf predation. They do their best to try and avoid areas with lots of wolves, and so there ends up being a lot of impacts on them that way. So in this diagram here, you can see that caribou are over in the corner in the spruce bog. They're away from some of the disturbance, and that's kind of where they excel. And just to kind of show as well, it's important to think about the human users of the land. So we have your guy on an ATV in here. Roads are really important for access and are really useful for hunting. And they also, allow us to get to, say, that mine or something else. But one of the key things from here is, could we have fewer roads and still have that access? Do we need all these trails? And that's where the planning comes into it. You'll see in the corner here too, there's some 3D seismic lines. They're pretty intense on the landscape. They're not as big, but there's a lot of them, and they cut up that habitat into smaller and smaller blocks. So you can think about how this might be different if there were half the number of roads, but they still went to the same places. What would that do? How would that impact different species? If we said, there's a lot of disturbance on this landscape, we're starting to see impacts on caribou or moose, maybe we should be thinking about making a different decision here. Maybe we need to close down some roads. Maybe we need to allow some of these areas to regenerate before we get, before there's a new project that comes in. So all these different pieces of the puzzle come together and allow us to better plan for the future. So I'm just going to leave it at that. And if there are questions, I am happy to answer them.
Thank you, Megan. That was super awesome. I loved seeing all the little GIFs. Those were great, especially the one with the grizzly bear chasing the moose. That's pretty sweet. So yeah, we do have some questions. So I'll just go to the first one here. So first one, who has to go through all the photos at the end of the season? And how long does that take?
So we have a few different people. I had a great STEP student this summer, and so she started working on it and continued to work on that a little bit through the fall. I looked at some of them as well. It's actually really helpful for me to see what's going on in the process of how we tag them, and it took a lot of time to go through and make sure we were getting as much information as possible out of the different photos. So I didn't show any here, but there's a couple times where there was like a number of wolves that came in. And so you have like 5 minutes of wolves coming through the camera, and you have to try and count them and make sure that you're counting all of them. So that takes a little bit longer. And as well, when we're counting the tines for antlers, that takes a little bit longer too, especially if you only have like half of a photo and or half of an antler in the photo and you're trying to count what's going on. So it can take anywhere from, 10 minutes to go through a site, maybe not quite 10 minutes, 20 minutes to an hour and a half. It totally depends on how many photos there are and how complicated they are.
So a lot of work, basically.
Yeah, it's a lot of work. Yeah.
Okay, so let's see here. What else I have? Do you guys ever get cameras where nothing shows up, even though the camera is working?
Yeah, unfortunately we do. That is one of the things with being in the Yukon. We have, we've got really interesting species around, but they're not at very high densities. And so sometimes we come to what I think is going to be a really great site, and there's nothing there. And who knows why that might be. There's also, we're learning as well. And so some of the first camera setups weren't as good as the ones at the end. And so we went back and moved those this year so that they're in the best place possible. So it certainly does happen. We don't like it when it happens, but it happens.
Fair enough. I guess that's understandable. Let's see. Another question I have here. How many cameras are out there and how long did it take to set them all up?
Yeah, so the first year we had 105 cameras out across those two areas. So we had, around 55 in the Mayo area and 60. So I guess 115. Yeah, 105, 40 in the Mayo area and 60 in the Beaver River. And it takes, so we put them up with helicopter. By helicopter, we have 2 crews going and we can put up about 10 a day. When we put them up by road, it's way slower. We have 2 crews going and sometimes we get 2 or 3 a day per crew. So that gives us like maybe 8 a day for the whole team. It totally depends. So, we're driving sometimes a couple of hours before we're actually getting the cameras up when we get out to some of these old resource roads. So it can take quite a bit of time. We put up a few more cameras this year. So we actually have about 140 out right now.
Holy smokes, it's a lot. So once again, a lot of work.
A lot of work. Yeah, it's less work to go back and check them. So it only took us, at least with the helicopter, it's less work. It takes just as much time to drive there, which is most of the work for checking the cameras. But yeah, it's good, and it's really interesting from year to year to sort of see how the landscape has changed too. It doesn't take very long sometimes to see some of those changes.
Let's see. What's your favorite unexpected thing you've ever caught on camera?
Whoa, that's a good question. I really like seeing the young animals. So seeing the cubs and calves at the beginning of the year. I mean, I didn't look through all of the photos, so I'm still trying to pick away at it just to sort of see what's out there. But that's, that cub in the tree that I showed earlier, that was pretty neat. The other really interesting thing that with these cameras is the lure that we put up. It often becomes like this marking tree. So you can see where like a porcupine might come through and mark it, and then a wolverine comes through and marks it, and then a wolf comes through and marks it. And it's really great for us because it's all these different animals are
Okay,
Right.
sorry about that, everybody. Something happened and we lost our connection, but we are back. So no worries. We will get back to the answers to some of these awesome questions. Okay, let's see. I'm a little flustered here. What were we on?
We were talking about animals marking, I think. Is that
That's
where we
right.
were?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
it's really great because it allows us to sort of see how all these different animals come through. And sometimes it's like one day a wolverine comes through and the next day a different wolverine comes through, or then a wolf comes through. And it's really cool to see how that all happens. And it makes our lure better. It's not really changing how animals use the landscape. It's just bringing them in a little bit closer. And we see the same thing with bears. They create like rub trees sometimes out of our scent lure, which is really interesting too.
That's so cool.
Mhm.
Wow. Okay, let's see. What else do we got going on here? You ever gotten a cougar on any of the cameras?
Oh, no, we haven't gotten a cougar. There are not very many cougars here in the Yukon. So I would be very surprised if we got one, but it would be very cool.
Awesome. Cool. Okay, let's see. What else? So why is there a preference for photos versus video? Or is it simply that the battery life gets used up if it's a video versus photos?
Yeah, so we actually, a lot of places go to cameras twice a year, and that maximizes the battery life, and then you can use video and you can do whatever. Because our areas are quite remote, we aren't able to do that. So we're only able to get there once a year, and our goal is really, to have those cameras active the whole time, which means that, like, for us, we're not actually getting that much more out of video than we would be out of photos. There's also, like, everything is just stored on an SD card. So we don't want to make sure that we have, a bunch of just videos, especially if it's like of leaves blowing or something like that.
Yeah, totally.
So we set it up with photos instead.
Totally makes sense. Okay, let's see. We got some more questions here. So will you leave the cameras in the same place for multiple years?
Yeah, so if the camera is a good site, we leave it there. We have a couple rules for why we move cameras. One of them is if we don't get very many species, or if we don't get key species that we're looking for. The other is that if we end up, like, we try really hard not to get humans on camera. It happens from time to time, but if it happens a lot, like we didn't realize that this was a hunting trail or something like that, then we move the camera so that we're not doing that. And all the photos of humans get deleted as well, so that we're not storing that information. And then sometimes, you have a tree that blows down or something like that, and it changes the site. So there's a couple different reasons why we would move a camera. Sometimes too, we don't realize all the things that might trigger that camera. And so again, trying to save battery life, we move it or just change the setup a little bit so that it doesn't, so that we have, the best photos we can get.
Totally makes sense. Let's see. So if a camera gets finicky in the winter, so say it's a dead battery or something, or it just stops working because it's been like -40, will it work again once the temperature warms up, or what happens there?
Yeah, so we only have one winter's experience to deal with that. And we had a couple different models of cameras last year that we used. One of them, the older models, is there was this setting that if they triggered, especially at night, which there's a lot of night in the winter, they would kill the battery. Yeah, and it wouldn't turn back on. But there is another camera that actually stopped for a little bit and then started again. And I suspect that had to do with the cold. But most of our cameras, we may not know, though we do have them take a daily photo. So we keep track of it that way, and that actually keeps the batteries a little bit warmer too, so they don't freeze. Otherwise, it could be months between detections. So we can actually tell if the camera's working by taking this daily photo, and we can track how much snow there is and whatnot that way. So that helps.
That's really cool. That's a lot of information that you can get just from that, for sure.
Yeah.
Okay, let's see. Oh, another question we have here. Can you explain the difference between bait and a lure?
Oh, that's a good question. So bait is typically is meat or something there. So there's a reward. So an animal comes in and they're like, hey, there's this old carcass here. I'm gonna come back and eat that. Whereas lure is just scent. So there's no reward for going there, except that, you know, the animals like rubbing themselves on it and whatnot. Just as you can picture your dog rolling in something, there's definitely photos of wolves doing that as well. So there's, in terms of like an attractant, they have slightly different functions. The lure kind of degrades over time, but we have actually seen the scent lure work for 9 or 10 months, which is really great. It's still bringing animals like right to that log where we have it. And then the other thing too is that bait can get dragged off by animals, so it could be removed from your site and then it's not serving its function.
Totally. You could just move a couple meters and you wouldn't see what's going on there.
Yeah, for sure. And I think, there's some risk there too, where, we're very aware that there's different people out on the landscape, and we don't want to be drawing bears into an area that they wouldn't be otherwise, or, cause them to keep coming back to an area. We try to put cameras like a kilometer away from where we know there's human activity, like a mining camp or a cabin, so that doesn't, so that we're not attracting any wildlife to an area that would potentially cause a conflict.
Totally makes sense. Yeah. Okay, let's see what else. Would you guys ever share data with another branch like water resources about, say, snow loads, or would they even care about that?
Yeah, I don't know. We're certainly we're always open to sharing data given whatever constraints there might be. But I don't know. There's interesting. We've thought about how we could like put stakes in to measure snow depth over time. And so that something like that might be more informative to somewhere like water resources. There's also potential for collaboration more broadly, especially after our immediate project wraps up and we get our questions answered. There's a lot of cameras out in, especially in the Western boreal area. And so there's potential for like being able to network and get really great information because it's all these cameras coming together. But there's complications on that too, because like cameras can be set up differently and you might get different information from them. So it's there's a couple challenges to think through that way.
Totally. Okay, let's see here. Don't see any more questions. If anybody has any other questions, please feel free to put them in the chat box below. And other than that, I just want to let everybody, thank everybody, first of all, for coming out tonight and listening to this great presentation. I know I definitely learned a lot. And please stay tuned. We're going to have more things happening over the next couple months. So if you go to our social media sites, so either Yukon Wildlife Viewing on Facebook or Yukon Wildlife Viewing on Instagram, all of the information will be up there, or yukon.ca/wild discoveries that has all of our events. And there's going to be a few more Facebook Live presentations, and there's going to be some outdoor in-person events as well. So just, stay tuned for what's happening next. And if you have any questions, please type them now or type them later. I'll come back later and check them again. Thank you, everybody, for coming. And thank you so much, Megan.
Yeah, thank you. This was great. It's a good way to be able to use technology through the pandemic here. So that's awesome.
We're making it work for us.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks, Olivia.
Thanks. All right, everybody, have a good night.
Bye.